Sandra Bullock had always been someone who loved adventure. Despite her glamorous life in Hollywood, she often craved moments of simplicity. Times when she could step away from the flashing cameras and endless interviews to just breathe. So on this particular day, she decided to do something different. Instead of hopping on a private jet or driving with a security team, Sandra chose to embark on a solo road trip across the country. She wanted to feel the open road beneath her tires, to see America in its raw, unfiltered beauty. Her journey began early in the morning as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sandra drove slowly at first, savoring the quiet hum of her car's engine and the gentle breeze that slipped through the cracked window. The radio played softly in the background, filling the silence with old-school rock songs that made her tap her fingers against the steering wheel. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of Los Angeles, where every moment seemed choreographed and controlled. As hours passed, the landscape around her transformed. The towering skyscrapers gave way to sprawling fields dotted with wildflowers, and the endless highways stretched out like ribbons leading to nowhere. Sandra felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. No one was asking for autographs, no paparazzi were lurking nearby, and no one even glanced twice at her. For once, she was just another traveler passing through, blending into the fabric of everyday life. But even the most idyllic journeys need breaks, and by late afternoon, Sandra realized she needed to refuel her car. The fuel gauge was inching, dangerously close to empty, and the next town was still miles away. Spotting a small gas station nestled along the side of the road, she pulled in, grateful for the reprieve. The place looked like it hadn't seen much action in years. Faded signs hung crookedly above rusted pumps, and the convenience store attached to it appeared worn down, its windows streaked with dust. Still, it was functional, and that was all Sandra cared about. She parked her car near one of the pumps and stepped out, stretching her legs after hours of sitting. The air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with the earthy scent of dry grass. A few birds chirped lazily in the distance, their calls mingling with the soft buzz of insects. Sandra took a deep breath, relishing the tranquility. This was exactly what she had hoped for when she set out on this trip, a chance to disconnect from the noise of the world. Grabbing the nozzle from the pump, Sandra began filling up her tank. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each click of the meter echoing in the stillness. She glanced around, taking in the desolate surroundings. There wasn't another soul in sight, which suited her just fine. After months of constant attention, solitude felt like a gift. However, that peace didn't last long. Just as Sandra was about to finish pumping gas, the distant rumble of engines broke the silence. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another traveler stopping for fuel, perhaps. But as the sound grew louder, she turned her head and saw a group of bikers approaching. Their motorcycles roared like angry beasts, kicking up clouds of dirt as they sped toward the gas station. One by one, they skidded to a halt, parking haphazardly around Sandra's car. The leader of the group dismounted first, his heavy boots thudding against the cracked asphalt. He was tall and muscular, with tattoos snaking up his arms and a leather vest adorned with patches that hinted at a rough lifestyle. His companions followed suit, swinging their legs over their bikes and removing their helmets. They laughed loudly, their voices carrying across the empty lot. Sandra instinctively tensed, her instincts telling her that something about these men wasn't right. For a moment, she considered ignoring them entirely. Maybe if she stayed focused on her task, they'd leave her alone. But it quickly became clear that wasn't going to happen. One of the bikers leaned casually against her car, his eyes scanning her curiously. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. What do we have here? A fancy lady in a fancy car? Sandra forced a polite smile, though her stomach churned with unease. Just passing through, she replied, keeping her tone light. She tried to busy herself with replacing the nozzle back onto the pump, hoping to signal that she wasn't interested in conversation. But the biker didn't take the hint. Instead, he moved closer, invading her personal space. You sure you don't want to stick around? He asked, his grin widening. We could show you a good time. Sandra's heart sank. she had dealt with rude comments before. It came with the territory of being famous, but there was something more menacing about this encounter. These men weren't just teasing. They seemed intent on making her uncomfortable. She glanced toward the convenience store, wondering if she could slip inside and call for help. But before she could make a move, the rest of the group joined in, surrounding her like vultures circling their prey. Their laughter echoed in her ears, sharp and cruel. Some of them made crude remarks about her appearance, while others suggested she join them for a drink. Sandra clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. She knew panicking wouldn't help, but the situation was spiraling out of control faster than she could process. As she stood there, trapped between her car and the growing crowd of bikers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was completely alone. Little did she know, however, that someone else was watching. From a distance, a figure observed the scene unfold, unnoticed by both Sandra and the bikers. This person had arrived at the gas station earlier, refueling their own vehicle before retreating to the shadows to grab a snack. When they returned and saw the commotion, they immediately recognized the danger Sandra was in. Without hesitation, they prepared to intervene, knowing that sometimes, even strangers can become heroes in the most unexpected ways. The bikers' behavior quickly escalated from harmless teasing to outright harassment. At first, their comments were lighthearted, or at least they tried to make them sound that way, but it didn't take long for their tone to shift. One of the men leaned closer to Sandra, his grin fading into something more predatory. "You know, you look familiar," he said, narrowing his eyes as if trying to place her face. "Have we met before?" Sandra's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew exactly what he was doing, trying to unsettle her further, and she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her panic. "I don't think so," she replied coolly, stepping back slightly to put some distance between them. Her voice betrayed none of the fear bubbling beneath the surface, though her hands trembled as she fumbled with the gas cap. The biker chuckled, clearly amused by her attempt to brush him off. "Nah, I'm sure I've seen you somewhere," he insisted, crossing his arms over his chest. "Maybe on TV? You one of those actresses or something?" Sandra hesitated for a split second, debating whether to admit who she was. On one hand, revealing her identity might make them back off, realizing they were messing with someone famous. On the other hand, it could make things worse. They might see her fame as an opportunity to cause even more trouble. In the end, she decided against saying anything. Instead, she simply shrugged and turned her attention back to her car, hoping they'd lose interest. But her silence only emboldened them. Another biker stepped forward, this one shorter and stockier than the leader, with a scruffy beard and a toothy grin. "Hey, maybe she's one of them rich Hollywood types," he suggested, nudging his friend with his elbow. "Bet she's got a nice stash of cash in that fancy purse of hers." Sandra's grip tightened on the strap of her bag instinctively. She hadn't brought much with her, just a wallet, her phone, and a few essentials. But the thought of these men getting anywhere near her belongings made her skin crawl. "I'm just here to fill up my car," she said firmly, injecting as much authority into her voice as she could muster. "If you'll excuse me." Her words trailed off as the group erupted into laughter, their voices echoing across the empty lot. The leader shook his head, clearly enjoying himself far too much. "Oh, come on, sweetheart," he drawled, taking another step toward her. "No need to be shy, we're just having a little fun." "Yeah, loosen up," chimed in another biker, twirling a set of keys around his finger. "We ain't gonna bite unless you want us to." The comment sent a fresh wave of unease through Sandra. She glanced around desperately, searching for any sign of help. A passing car, a store clerk, anything. But the gas station remained eerily deserted. Even the convenience store seemed abandoned. Its windows were dark, and there was no movement inside. For all intents and purposes, she was completely alone with these men. As the seconds ticked by, Sandra's mind raced. She needed to find a way out of this situation, but every option felt fraught with risk. If she tried to run to her car, they might block her path. If she screamed for help, there was no guarantee anyone would hear her. And if she called the police, who knew how long it would take for them to arrive? Every scenario played out in her head like a movie, each ending more terrifying than the last. Meanwhile, the bikers continued their relentless taunting. They moved in closer, forming a loose circle around her that left no room for escape. Some of them joked about her accent, mimicking it in exaggerated tones that made the others laugh. Others speculated about why she was traveling alone, suggesting increasingly inappropriate reasons. Through it all, Sandra kept her focus on staying composed, though inside she was screaming. Then, without warning, the leader reached out and tapped her shoulder. It wasn't a hard touch, but it was enough to make her flinch. "Relax," he said, smirking as if he'd done her a favor. "We're not going to hurt you. Just want to chat." Sandra took a deep breath, forcing herself not to react. She had dealt with difficult people before, rude fans, pushy reporters, demanding directors. But this was different. These men weren't just being rude, they were testing her boundaries, pushing her to see how far they could go before she snapped. And while part of her wanted to lash out, she knew that losing her temper would only make things worse. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I really need to get going. Thanks for understanding." She turned toward her car, hoping to signal that the conversation was over. But the leader grabbed her arm, stopping her in her tracks. "Hold on a sec," he said, his tone suddenly sharper. "We're not done talking." For the first time since the encounter began, Sandra felt true fear. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm enough to remind her that she wasn't in control. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at him, searching for any hint of humanity in his expression. All she found was amusement, a cruel, detached kind of amusement that sent chills down her spine. Before she could respond, however, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" The sound startled everyone, including Sandra. She turned her head sharply, her eyes widening as she saw a man standing a few feet away. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and an unassuming demeanor that somehow commanded attention. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his posture relaxed yet alert, as if he were ready for anything. The bikers, too, seemed taken aback by his sudden appearance. The leader released Sandra's arm and straightened up, his smirk faltering for a moment. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with irritation. The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step forward, positioning himself between Sandra and the group. His gaze swept over the bikers, assessing them with a calmness that bordered on indifference. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "I asked if there's a problem here," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Because, if there is, I suggest you fix it." For a moment, no one moved. The air grew thick with tension, the kind that felt heavy enough to crush you. The leader exchanged glances with his crew, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected interruption. Sandra, meanwhile, stood frozen, torn between relief and disbelief. Who was this man, and why had he chosen to intervene? When the leader finally broke the silence, his bravado had returned, though it lacked the same edge as before. "Mind your own business, pal," he growled, jabbing a finger in the stranger's direction. "This ain't got nothing to do with you." The stranger raised an eyebrow, unfazed by the threat. "Actually," he said evenly, "it does. Because he gestured toward Sandra, is leaving now, and none of you are going to stop her." His words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Sandra felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, though she wasn't naive enough to believe. The situation was resolved. The bikers still outnumbered them, and there was no telling how they'd react. But for the first time since pulling into the gas station, she didn't feel entirely alone. The stranger's calm demeanor and unwavering stance seemed to throw the bikers off balance. For a moment, no one spoke. The leader of the group stared at him, his jaw tightening as if trying to decide whether this newcomer was bluffing or genuinely prepared to stand his ground. His friends shifted uncomfortably behind him, exchanging uncertain glances. It was clear they hadn't expected anyone to challenge them, especially not someone who looked so unassuming. Keanu Reeves, though he didn't introduce himself yet, had always been the kind of person who believed in doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he also wasn't about to walk away from a situation where someone needed help. As he stood there, his eyes locked onto the leaders, he exuded a quiet confidence that made the bikers hesitate. There was something about him, a subtle authority in his posture, a steadiness in his gaze, that suggested he wasn't just another passerby who could be intimidated. The leader finally broke the silence, his voice laced with mockery. "You think you're tough, huh?" he sneered, taking a step closer to Keanu. "What are you gonna do, huh? Take all of us on by yourself?" Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, allowing the tension to build. When he did speak, his tone remained calm and measured. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice steady. "But I am here to make sure she gets back to her car safely. And if any of you have a problem with that, we can figure it out." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Sandra, standing slightly behind him now, felt a surge of gratitude mixed with disbelief. She had no idea who this man was, but his presence was like a shield, a barrier between her and the chaos threatening to overwhelm her. Still, she couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her insides. These men were unpredictable, and even though Keanu seemed confident, there was no guarantee things wouldn't escalate. The leader laughed, though it sounded forced. "Oh, look at this guy," he said, turning to his crew. "Thinks he's some kind of hero." His friends chuckled nervously, but their laughter lacked conviction. They glanced at each other, silently weighing their options. None of them moved to confront Keanu directly, which only deepened the tension. Keanu didn't flinch. He kept his focus on the leader, his body relaxed but ready. Years of training for action roles had taught him how to read people, to anticipate their movements, and gauge their intentions. He could tell the bikers were posturing, trying to intimidate him into backing down. But intimidation didn't work on someone like Keanu. He had faced far scarier situations in his life, both on-screen and off, and he knew how to stay composed, under pressure. "You've got two choices," Keanu continued, his voice cutting through the nervous energy like a knife. "You can leave quietly, or we can see how this plays out. Your call." The leader hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Keanu's directness. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked so ordinary. Most people would have backed down by now, intimidated by the sheer number of bikers. But Keanu wasn't most people. His calmness was unnerving, almost as if he had seen this scenario unfold countless times before, and maybe he had in the movies. Only this time, it was real. Before the leader could respond, a distant sound pierced the air, a faint wail of sirens growing louder in the distance. Everyone froze, including Sandra and Keanu. The bikers exchanged panicked looks, their bravado melting away instantly. None of them had noticed the police cruiser approaching until it was too late. Its flashing lights reflected off the gas stations, faded signs casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. "Cops," one of the bikers hissed, breaking the spell. The leader cursed under his breath, glaring at Keanu as if blaming him for the interruption. "This ain't over," he muttered, though his threat lacked conviction. Without waiting for a response, he turned and hurried back to his motorcycle, motioning for his crew to follow. Within seconds, the group was revving their engines, kicking up clouds of dust as they sped away. The roar of their bikes drowned out the sound of the approaching sirens, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. Sandra watched them go, her legs feeling weak with relief. She leaned against her car for support, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Keanu waited until the last motorcycle disappeared around the bend before turning to Sandra. His expression softened, the intensity replaced by genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice warm and reassuring. Sandra nodded, though tears welled up in her eyes. I think so," she stammered, struggling to find the right words. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." Keanu smiled gently, brushing off her gratitude with a modest wave of his hand. "Don't mention it," he said simply. "I'm just glad I was here." As the police cruiser pulled into the gas station, its red and blue lights casting a surreal glow over the scene. Sandra realized how close she had come to disaster. The officers stepped out, surveying the area with curious expressions. One of them approached Keanu and Sandra, asking if everything was all right. Keanu explained the situation briefly, emphasizing that the bikers had fled before anything serious could happen. The officers nodded, jotting down notes and promising to keep an eye out for the group. Once they were satisfied that no immediate danger remained, they wished Sandra and Keanu well and drove off, leaving the two of them alone once again. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sandra busied herself with finishing up at the pump, her hands still trembling slightly as she replaced the nozzle. Keanu lingered nearby, giving her space but staying close enough to ensure she felt safe. Finally, after several minutes of awkward silence, Sandra turned to him, her voice filled with emotion. "I really can't thank you enough," she said, meeting his gaze. "You didn't have to do what you did, but you did it anyway. That means more to me than I can say." Keanu shrugged, his humility shining through. "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Many people would have chosen to stay out of it, fearing the consequences of getting involved. But Keanu wasn't like that. He believed in standing up for others even when it meant putting himself in harm's way. Sandra shook her head, smiling despite the lingering adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Not everyone," she corrected him softly. "Most people wouldn't have had the courage to step in like you did. You saved me." Keanu didn't argue further. Instead, he offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Let's get you back on the road," he said, gesturing toward her car. "You've got places to be." Together, they walked to her vehicle, Keanu keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings just in case the bikers decided to return. Sandra climbed into the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. Keanu leaned down, resting his arms on the open window frame. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out," he told her sincerely. "And please, be careful out there." Sandra nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I will," she promised. "And thank you again. Really, I mean it." With that, Keanu stepped back, giving her a final nod before heading toward his own motorcycle. As Sandra pulled away from the gas station, she couldn't help but glance in her rearview mirror, watching as Keanu grew smaller in the distance. She didn't know much about him, but she knew one thing for certain. He was a good man, one of the rare ones who truly lived by the values he believed in, and as she drove off, the memory of his kindness stayed with her, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are still heroes willing to step forward and make a difference. Sandra's car hummed softly as she drove away from the gas station, the adrenaline that had coursed through her veins slowly beginning to ebb. The further she got from the scene, the more surreal it all felt. She replayed the events in her mind, the bikers' menacing presence, their taunts, the overwhelming fear that had gripped her, and then Keanu's sudden appearance like a bolt of lightning cutting through the storm. It was hard to believe it had actually happened, but it had happened. And as much as Sandra wanted to leave it behind her, she couldn't stop thinking about the stranger who had stepped in when she needed help most. Who was he? He hadn't introduced himself, and in the chaos, she hadn't thought to ask. All she knew was that he carried himself with an air of quiet strength, the kind that inspired confidence without needing to shout for attention. She glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see him still standing there, watching over her. But the road behind her was empty now, stretching endlessly into the horizon. Her thoughts drifted back to the bikers. Would they come after her? Had they really fled because of the sirens? Or because of Keanu? She shuddered at the memory of their leader's grip on her arm, his mocking grin, the way they had circled her like predators closing in on prey. If Keanu hadn't intervened. Sandra shook her head, refusing to let herself finish that thought. What mattered was that she was safe now. Still, the encounter left her shaken, a reminder of how quickly a peaceful moment could turn dangerous. Meanwhile, Keanu had returned to his motorcycle, leaning against it as he watched Sandra drive off. His heart was still racing, though he hid it well. Standing up to those bikers hadn't been easy, not because he was afraid of them, but because he knew the stakes. One wrong move, one misstep, and the situation could have spiraled out of control. But something inside him had clicked the moment he saw the fear in Sandra's eyes. He couldn't stand by and do nothing, not when someone needed help. As he revved the engine of his bike and prepared to leave, Keanu allowed himself a small smile. Helping people wasn't about recognition or praise, it was simply the right thing to do. Yet he couldn't deny feeling a sense of satisfaction knowing he'd made a difference, even if it was just for one person. Still, he hoped Sandra would be okay. Road trips were supposed to be freeing, not terrifying. He wished he could have done more to reassure her, but sometimes all you could do was offer a lifeline and hope the other person took hold of it. Keanu's mind wandered as he rode down the highway, retracing the route he'd planned for his own journey. This trip wasn't unlike Sandra's, an escape from the noise of Hollywood, a chance to reconnect with himself and the world around him. He loved acting, of course, but the constant spotlight could wear on anyone. Out here, on the open road, he felt grounded, free. The wind whipped past him, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and fresh earth. For a while, he forgot about the gas station, the bikers, and everything else, letting the rhythm of the ride soothe his thoughts. Hours later, Sandra pulled into a roadside diner, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields of golden grass. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. She parked her car and sat for a moment, staring out at the breathtaking view. It was beautiful, peaceful, but her mind kept drifting back to earlier that day. She needed to process what had happened, to unpack the emotions swirling inside her before they consumed her completely. Pushing open the car door, Sandra stepped out and stretched her legs. The diner was small and unassuming, its neon sign flickering faintly in the twilight. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and fried food. A few patrons sat scattered across the booths, chatting quietly or sipping their drinks. Sandra slid into a corner seat, ordering a cup of tea and a slice of pie. As she waited for her order, she pulled out her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through social media. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated sending a message to a friend, explaining what had happened. But how could she put it into words? Instead, she opened a blank note on her phone and began typing. Writing had always been her way of processing things, of untangling the knots in her mind. She wrote about the bikers, their hostility, the suffocating fear she'd felt. Then she wrote about Keanu, his calm demeanor, his unwavering courage, the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation. By the time her tea arrived, the page was filled with words, each sentence a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. As she sipped her tea, Sandra realized something important. The incident at the gas station wasn't just a random event. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could change. But it was also a reminder of the goodness that still existed in the world. People like Keanu didn't come along every day. They reminded her that kindness and bravery weren't relics of the past. They were alive and well, waiting to shine in moments of need. The next morning, Sandra woke up early, determined to continue her journey, despite the lingering unease from the previous day. She checked her map, planning her route carefully to avoid isolated areas where she might feel vulnerable. Before leaving her motel room, she jotted down a mental note to find a way to thank Keanu properly. She owed him more than a simple thank you. She owed him peace of mind. Back on the road, Sandra found herself driving slower, taking in the scenery she had rushed through before. Each mile brought new sights: a herd of deer grazing near a stream, a weathered barn standing tall against the skyline, a family of ducks waddling across the highway. These small moments reminded her why she had embarked on this trip in the first place: to slow down, to appreciate the beauty of the ordinary. Life was unpredictable, yes, but it was also full of wonder if you knew where to look. By midday, Sandra reached a larger town with a bustling main street lined with shops and cafes. She decided to stop for lunch, parking her car near a bookstore that caught her eye. As she browsed the shelves, flipping through novels and travel guides, she spotted a familiar face on the cover of a magazine displayed at the checkout counter. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Keanu Reeves. She stared at the image for a long moment, her heart skipping a beat. Of course. How had she not recognized him sooner? The humility, the quiet confidence, the unmistakable charisma. It all made sense now. Keanu wasn't just some random traveler. He was one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood. And yet he had acted without pretense, without expecting anything in return. That realization hit Sandra like a tidal wave. Clutching the magazine, Sandra hurried to the register, buying it impulsively. She flipped through the pages, reading snippets of interviews and articles about his work and personal life. What struck her most was how often people described him as kind, humble, and genuine. Those weren't just words thrown around by journalists. They were truths reflected in the way he had handled himself at the gas station. He truly lived by the values he preached. Sandra tucked the magazine into her bag, smiling to herself as she walked back to her car. She didn't know how or even if she'd ever cross paths with Keanu again, but she vowed to reach out, to express her gratitude in a way that matched the magnitude of what he had done for her. Whether it was through a letter, a phone call, or a public acknowledgement, she wanted him to know how much his actions had meant to her. As she drove away from the town, the sun shining brightly overhead, Sandra felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer feared it. Instead, she embraced it, knowing that every twist and turn held the potential for growth, connection, and discovery. And somewhere out there, riding his motorcycle under the same wide-open sky, Keanu continued his journey too, unaware of the lasting impact he had made on a stranger's life. A few days had passed since the incident at the gas station, and Sandra couldn't stop thinking about Keanu. She replayed their brief interaction in her mind over and over again. The calmness in his voice, the way he had positioned himself, between her and the bikers without hesitation. The simple yet profound reassurance he offered when everything felt like it was falling apart. It wasn't just that he had stepped in. It was how he had done it. There was no showboating, no grand gestures, just quiet strength and unwavering kindness. That kind of humility left a lasting impression. Sandra knew she had to thank him properly. A fleeting thank you at the gas station wasn't enough. This was someone who had risked his safety for her. Someone who reminded her that even in the darkest moments, there are still good people willing to stand up for others. She owed him more than words could ever fully express. But how do you track down a man like Keanu Reeves? He wasn't exactly hard to find, he was famous after all. But reaching out to him felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Would he even remember her? Would he think it strange that she was contacting him? Despite her doubts, Sandra decided to try. She started by drafting an email. Sitting at a small wooden table in her hotel room one evening, she opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she wrestled with what to say. How do you begin a message to someone who saved your life, but also happens to be one of the most respected figures in Hollywood? After several false starts, she finally settled on something simple and heartfelt. Subject: Thank you. Dear Mr. Reeves, hope this message finds you well. I'm not sure if you'll remember me. We met briefly at a gas station a few days ago. But I wanted to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude for what you did. When those men were harassing me, I felt completely alone and overwhelmed. But then you appeared, and everything changed. Your courage and selflessness gave me back my sense of safety, and for that I will always be thankful. I don't know if you realize how much of an impact your actions had on me. In a world where it often feels like compassion is in short supply, you reminded me that kindness still exists, and that some people are willing to put themselves in harm's way to protect others. Please know that your gesture meant more to me than I can put into words. If there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness, please don't hesitate to let me know. Until then, I wish you all the best on your journey and beyond. With sincere appreciation, Sandra Bullock. Reading it over, Sandra felt a mix of nervousness and relief. The note wasn't perfect, how could it be? But it came from the heart. She hesitated for a moment before hitting send, wondering if she should attach her contact information or include a photo to jog his memory. Ultimately, she decided against. If Keanu wanted to respond, he would. And if he didn't, she understood. Sometimes acts of kindness weren't done for recognition. They were done because they were the right thing to do. To her surprise, Keanu replied within 24 hours. Subject, thank you. Dear Ms. Bullock, thank you for your kind words. To be honest, I wasn't sure if you'd recognize me. I certainly didn't expect such a thoughtful message. I'm glad I was able to help. Though I must insist that anyone in my position would have done the same. What happened at the gas station was unfortunate, but I'm relieved to hear you're safe and continuing your journey. Road trips like yours remind us of how vast and beautiful this country is, and I hope the rest of your travels bring you peace and joy. Please don't feel the need to repay me. I acted because it was the right thing to do, nothing more. However, if our paths cross again someday, I'd love to share a cup of coffee and hear about your adventures. Until then, take care of yourself and keep exploring. Warm regards. Keanu. Sandra read the email multiple times, smiling softly each time. His response was exactly what she expected, gracious, humble, and free of any pretense. It was clear that Keanu didn't see himself as a hero. He simply believed in doing the right thing, regardless of the circumstances. That mindset resonated deeply with Sandra. She admired it, not just in him but as a philosophy she wished more people embraced. Inspired by his reply, Sandra decided to reach out again, not to bombard him with messages but to maintain a connection. Over the next few weeks, they exchanged emails sporadically, sharing stories about their respective journeys. Sandra told him about the stunning landscapes she'd encountered, the quirky roadside attractions she'd visited, and the unexpected lessons she'd learned along the way. Keanu, in turn, shared anecdotes from his own travels, describing hidden gems he'd discovered and the people he'd met who had touched his life. Their conversations were lighthearted yet meaningful, filled with mutual respect and admiration. Sandra found herself looking forward to his replies, which always arrived promptly and carried the same warmth and sincerity as his initial response. Though they came from different worlds, she, a household name in Hollywood, and he, a man celebrated for his humility, they quickly realized they had much in common. Both valued simplicity, cherished moments of solitude, and believed in using their platforms to spread positivity. One day, Sandra mentioned that she was planning to visit a small town known for its annual arts festival. It's supposed to be beautiful, she wrote, the kind of place where time slows down and everyone knows each other's names. Keanu responded almost immediately. Funny you should mention that. I'll actually be passing through there next week. Maybe we'll run into each other. The idea thrilled Sandra. Meeting Keanu again in person felt like fate, a chance to thank him face to face and deepen the bond they had formed online. She replied enthusiastically, joking that she'd wear a bright yellow hat so he'd spot her in the crowd. As the date of the festival approached, Sandra grew increasingly excited. She packed carefully, choosing outfits that balanced comfort with style, and made sure to pack the yellow hat she'd teased him about. Arriving in the town a day early, she wandered through its charming streets, marveling at the colorful murals painted on building walls and the friendly smiles of locals going about their daily routines. It was exactly the kind of place she had imagined, a sanctuary far removed from the chaos of city life. On the morning of the festival, Sandra woke up early, eager to explore before the crowds arrived. The air smelled of fresh baked goods and blooming flowers, and the sun cast a golden glow over the town square. Booths selling handmade crafts, jewelry, and paintings lined the sidewalks, while musicians played lively tunes on street corners. Everywhere she looked, there was laughter and joy. And then, as she browsed a stall filled with vintage postcards, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Is that a yellow hat? Sandra turned around, her heart skipping a beat. Sure enough, there he was, Keanu, standing a few feet away with a wide grin on his face. He looked exactly as she remembered. Kind-eyed, approachable, and radiating an easygoing charm that put everyone at ease. "Guilty as charged," she said, laughing as she adjusted the brim of her hat. "You said you'd recognize me, so I figured I'd make it easy." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head in amusement. "Well, mission accomplished. You look great." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, grinning at each other like old friends reunited after years apart. Then, without warning, Sandra stepped forward and hugged him tightly. It was an impulsive gesture born out of pure gratitude and affection. Keanu returned the embrace warmly, patting her gently on the back. "I'm so glad we ran into each other," Sandra said as they pulled apart. "This feels surreal." "It does," Keanu agreed, nodding. "But in a good way." They spent the rest of the day together, wandering through the festival and chatting about everything under the sun. From movies and music to personal philosophies and dreams for the future, their conversation flowed effortlessly, as if they had known each other for years. Sandra learned that Keanu was just as passionate about giving back to the community as he was about acting, often volunteering his time and resources to support causes close to his heart. Keanu, meanwhile, was fascinated by Sandra's resilience and determination, qualities that had helped her navigate the challenges of fame with grace and authenticity. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, both of them felt a deep sense of connection. What had started as a chance encounter at a gas station had blossomed into a genuine friendship, one built on shared values, mutual respect, and a belief in the goodness of humanity. As they parted ways later that evening, Sandra extended an invitation. "If you're ever in LA, let me know. We'll grab dinner and catch up properly." Keanu smiled, nodding. "I'd like that. And if you're ever in Canada, the offer stands for you too." With a final wave, they went their separate ways, each carrying a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Sandra knew she would never forget the events that brought them together, or the reminder that even in the most unlikely places, heroes exist. And Keanu, for his part, walked away knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that last a lifetime. In the weeks that followed their meeting at the arts festival, Sandra and Keanu stayed in touch, their friendship growing stronger with each passing day. They weren't constantly messaging or calling. Neither of them was the type to demand constant attention, but when they did connect, it was meaningful. Whether it was a quick text checking in after a long flight or an email sharing photos from their latest adventures, their exchanges were filled with warmth and genuine care. It was clear that both of them cherished this newfound bond, not just because of how they met, but because of what it represented. Two people who believed in kindness, humility, and making the world a little brighter. Sandra often found herself reflecting on how different her life might have been if she hadn't stopped at that gas station. The thought sent chills down her spine. What if Keanu hadn't been there? What if the bikers had escalated things further before the police arrived? She didn't like to dwell on those what-ifs, but they reminded her of something important. Life is unpredictable. Sometimes danger comes out of nowhere, leaving you feeling powerless, but sometimes so does courage, and unexpected friendships can bloom in the most unlikely places. Keanu, too, thought about the incident occasionally. He wasn't one to pat himself on the back for doing the right thing. It simply wasn't in his nature. But he couldn't deny that the encounter had left an impression on him. Meeting Sandra had given him a renewed appreciation for the impact small actions could have. Stepping in at the gas station hadn't been a calculated decision. It had come naturally to him. Still, seeing how much it meant to Sandra reinforced his belief that even the smallest gestures of kindness could change someone's life. Their paths crossed again a few months later, this time in Los Angeles. Sandra had extended another invitation, and Keanu, true to his word, accepted. On a crisp autumn evening, they met at a cozy Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The place was intimate, with dim lighting, checkered tablecloths, and the faint aroma of garlic bread wafting through the air. It was the kind of spot where celebrities could dine without drawing too much attention, which suited both of them perfectly. As they sat across from each other, sipping glasses of red wine and sharing plates of pasta, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything: their careers, their families, their favorite books and movies. Sandra laughed as Keanu recounted a funny story about working on set with a particularly stubborn dog during one of his recent projects. Keanu listened intently as Sandra shared her experiences navigating motherhood while maintaining her career. There was no pretense between them, no need to impress or compete. They were just two people enjoying each other's company, grateful for the connection they had formed. At one point, Sandra leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the gas station," she said softly, "and I realized something. That day changed me." Keanu raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "How so?" "It made me realize how fragile life is," Sandra explained, "but also how resilient we can be when we stick together. You didn't have to help me, Keanu. No one would have blamed you if you had walked away, but you didn't. And that gave me hope. It reminded me that there are still good people in this world." Keanu smiled, touched by her words. "I think you're giving me too much credit," he said modestly. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." "Maybe," Sandra replied, shaking her head slightly. "But they didn't, you did, and I'll never forget that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her gratitude hung in the air, palpable yet comforting. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. "If anything, I should thank you," he said earnestly. "Meeting you has reminded me why it's so important to stay grounded, to remember that fame doesn't define us. What defines us is how we treat others, especially when no one's watching." Sandra nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Exactly. That's what makes you such a special person, Keanu. You live by your values every single day. Not many people can say that." They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about their journeys, swapping stories of triumphs and challenges alike. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent tiramisu served with a dusting of cocoa powder, they were laughing like old friends, completely at ease in each other's presence. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Sandra turned to Keanu with a playful smile. "So, does this mean we're officially friends now?" she teased. Keanu chuckled, pretending to consider the question. "Well, considering we've survived biker confrontations and awkward first meetings, I'd say we're off to a pretty solid start." Sandra laughed, linking her arm through his, as they strolled down the street. "Good, because I'm not letting you go anytime soon." Over the next year, their friendship continued to flourish. They supported each other through personal milestones: a movie premiere for Sandra, a motorcycle ride across Canada for Keanu, and celebrated holidays together whenever their schedules allowed. Sandra introduced Keanu to her children, who immediately adored his gentle demeanor and endless patience. Keanu, in turn, invited Sandra to join him for a charity event he was hosting, where she marveled at his ability to connect with strangers and make them feel valued. Their bond became a source of inspiration for those around them. In an industry often criticized for its superficiality, Sandra and Keanu proved that real connections were possible. They weren't friends because of mutual benefit or shared fame. They were friends because they genuinely liked and respected each other. Their relationship was rooted in authenticity, something that felt increasingly rare in Hollywood. Eventually, Sandra decided to share their story publicly, not to gain attention, but to highlight the importance of kindness and bravery in everyday life. During an interview for a popular talk show, she recounted the events at the gas station, describing Keanu's intervention with heartfelt admiration. "He didn't have to step in," she told the host, her voice steady but emotional. "But he did, and it reminded me that heroes aren't just characters in movies, they're real people who choose to do the right thing even when it's hard." The audience erupted into applause, moved by her words. When asked if Keanu knew she was sharing the story, Sandra grinned. "Oh, absolutely. We talked about it beforehand. He's fine with it. As long as I promise not to call him a hero." The segment went viral, sparking conversations about compassion and the power of small acts of courage. Fans flooded social media with messages praising Keanu's humility and Sandra's vulnerability. For once, the internet was filled with positivity, reminding everyone that even in a world plagued by negativity, there were still stories worth celebrating. Years later, Sandra and Keanu remained close friends, their bond as strong as ever. Though, their lives took them in different directions, with Sandra focusing on her family and philanthropy, and Keanu continuing to explore new creative ventures. They always made time for each other. Whether it was a quick phone call to catch up or a spontaneous road trip to revisit the site of their first meeting, their friendship endured. Looking back, Sandra often thought about how fate had brought them together. A chance encounter at a remote gas station had led to a lifelong connection, one that reminded her of the beauty of humanity and the importance of standing up for others. Keanu, meanwhile, saw their friendship as a testament to the idea that kindness transcends boundaries. Fame, fortune, and circumstance didn't matter. What mattered was treating others with respect and empathy. And so their story became more than just a tale of coincidence or bravery. It became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through, if only we're willing to let it. Sandra and Keanu proved that heroes don't wear capes. They wear hearts full of compassion, ready to step forward when needed most.